You're listening to the Swap Society podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Robertson. I interview thought leaders and change makers who are working to create a more sustainable and equitable world through fashion, art, and activism. Join us for a dose of climate optimism as we envision a brighter future. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Swap Society podcast. Today, I'm talking with Elisha Chan, the Executive Director of Fairtrade LA. Hi, Elisha. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations on your new podcast.
Thank you. We're so excited, and congratulations about yours. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. I know you also just launched a podcast. Where are you talking to us from today?
Yeah, I am actually in Los Angeles. I know we could be tuning in from all over the place, but today I'm in Los Angeles.
And where are you from originally?
Oh, so many places. I grew up in Hong Kong for 8 years, and then San Francisco, and then moved to LA to go to UCLA. So I've been calling LA my home.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Please share a little bit about your background. How did you come to work with Fairtrade LA, and just get into the fair trade scene in general?
Yeah. So my fair trade journey kind of started in Haiti. I had been going to Haiti for many years, volunteering when I was a student at UCLA, and just saw this abject poverty. People just didn't have money for food, send their kids to school, even housing, just the most basic things. And I thought, what is the solution? Like, we can give them rice and beans that will feed them for maybe a few weeks, but after the food runs out, they're going to go back to their original state. And I was just desperate to find long-term solutions where I could truly make a lasting impact. And that's when I discovered that jobs is the key to ending poverty. But then I also learned that other people realize that as well and exploit them, because the people that are most vulnerable to trafficking there are people who are economically vulnerable. And so it's not just any jobs, but fair paying jobs. With a fair and sustainable wage, they can actually make a living and break the cycle of poverty. So at that point, I still didn't know what fair trade was. I just knew that jobs, sustainable jobs. So I found all these artisans and coffee farmers that I now still work with in Haiti, and they're making beautiful things. And I thought, what a powerful concept if we bring their products to the marketplace and be able to, encourage job creation in Haiti that can help alleviate poverty. And that's what led me to Fairtrade LA, the nonprofit here in Los Angeles, who is basically a collective of amazing businesses and individuals that care about the same thing, like-minded community. And we have people that work with artisans from Bali to Rwanda, all over the world, and just really blessed to be a part of this community.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. How did you come to go to Haiti in the first place? What got you there?
Yeah, there was a student group at UCLA that started going there decades. Like, they've been leading teams for over 2 decades. So I was able to jump in and help volunteer with them. And that's what brought me to this small village in Haiti called Fondus.
Very cool. It all started at UCLA.
Yep.
We're obviously throwing around the term fair trade, and not everybody necessarily knows what that means. So How would you define fair trade?
Yeah, I would say the most basic terms is that fair trade is a business model for good. Something that I love about fair trade is that we're talking about trade and not aid. So it's important to identify that fair trade is not just like philanthropy work. It is actually a business model that I believe is sustainable. And fair trade essentially means that people were paid fairly. People who made your products were paid fairly. There's no child labor. People are working in safe conditions. There's 10 fair trade principles that is on our website, and you can find it online. But yeah, it's when you buy a fair trade product, it means that someone has gone to, whether it's the factories or the farms, to certify and make sure that people were actually paid fairly.
So what are the different fair trade certifications and how can people avoid fair washing?
Yeah, so I actually have this bookmark with the different logos to share with you guys. This is Fairtrade USA, Fairtrade America. These are the two main certifiers, and you may have seen Fair for Life as well. These are the main product certifiers. So what that means is they actually go to the farms, they go to the factories to certify the product itself, making sure that the entire supply chain follows the fair trade principles. Now, this one, the Fair Trade Federation, you will often see that in a lot of fair trade businesses that involve like jewelry and maybe even some clothing, because there are certain products that just have a very long and complicated supply chain, which makes it really hard to certify that one product. Like earrings, where did the hooks come from? Where did this or that come from? It's a long supply chain. And so Fair Trade Federation members and people with the Fair Trade Federation logo, it means that the business itself is certified fair trade, like the way that they work with their different suppliers, the way they work with the different artisans. So those are the different logos to look for. But I will say this, working personally with artisans in Haiti, there are so many small businesses that just, one, have not scaled to that level where they can even afford a certification. And two, they just literally all their money is going back into just functioning, right? Making sure that their operation functions. So there are, I believe, small businesses, social enterprises that are doing fair trade, that are doing good. They just don't have the logo. So then that goes back to how about fair washing, right? And sure. I hate to put this responsibility on the consumers, but I think that just with a little bit of research on the company and diving into the company, you can see a lot. So if this company works directly with artisans and they are working with their makers and they care about the makers, they will show that. They will show that on their website. They will show that in their language. Like if they know these people personally, like you can just see that just with a little bit of research. And but unfortunately, that has to fall on the consumers. And of course, we hope that brands that are doing good will do their job, in explaining their mission as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? I mean, I obviously, personally, I don't want to buy things that were made by slaves or enslaved children. I know you mentioned children as well. What, and I don't know if you know this stat off the top of your head, but how many children are working in slavery today in the modern day?
Yeah. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I will say this. There are most child labor in the chocolate industry, which is just so ironic, right? Who enjoys chocolate the most? Children. Yeah. And there's actually most child labor in the chocolate industry. And it's because most of the cacao that makes the chocolate is harvested in West Africa. And so there's a lot of poverty. So then a lot of the parents send their kids to harvest these cacaos to make maybe a little bit of money. Some maybe even never seeing the money, and they don't get an education that is just literally survival. So that's just one area where people are not aware of, and it's like heartbreaking, but that's why we share about fair trade chocolate a lot, because especially around Halloween, like there's a reason why these chocolates are so cheap if you think about it, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. Personally, there are a few things that I always look for a fair trade certification on, and that is chocolate. And I like chocolate. So fortunately, there are a lot of brands of fair trade chocolate that are accessible to us here, at least in Los Angeles. I know that that might not be the case everywhere.
Yeah.
Also coffee and tea and clothing.
Yeah.
Are there any other, what are, from your perspective, what are the most important categories that people should be looking for a fair trade certification on?
Yeah. It's so hard for me to choose because obviously there's exploitation in all those industries, whether it's garment workers or farm workers. So I would actually turn that around and ask our audience, like, what do you need next? Or what is that one thing you can get, you can commit to fair trade first. So like for me personally, because I drink coffee in the morning, my first easy item was coffee. Like, why don't I just start with fair trade coffee? And one, I could taste the huge difference, like the quality difference. Once I started drinking fair trade coffee, I just couldn't go back to regular coffee. And then clothing, it was like, what about your underwear? Your undergarments, like things like that, where they're like smaller pieces that kind of get you in the door. And then it's just like one step at a time. Because oftentimes after people hear this conversation, they feel like, oh, I need to throw out my whole pantry. I need to throw out my whole closet. It's like, no, that's not what we're trying to say. Preserve what you have and appreciate it. But it's like, okay, what's that next thing you need to get? Maybe it's a gift for somebody. Why don't you start with like a fair trade gift? Because ultimately, when you shop any of those items fair trade, you are making sure the makers, whether it's a garment worker or, farm worker, they are being paid fairly. And it's so important that this spreads across all these industries.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of industries that just simply don't have fair trade certifications. Obviously, if I go to the farmer's market to buy my produce, for example, I have a better feeling and connection with the farm that I'm shopping from. But if I go to a random grocery store, I feel like most products don't have fair trade certifications. And so those categories, those categories where it's a little bit easier to find, I try to always do that. But then there are also things like, holiday decorations, for example, where, I've been in stores with my kids and they'll say, I want to buy that. And they're really little, but I'll still have a semi awkward conversation for me where it's like, how much do I want to tell them right now? But okay, well, I really don't want to buy that because I'm pretty sure that the people that made that weren't paid fairly and I don't really want to support that company. From what I've learned and, what seems accessible and kind of those low-hanging fruit, so to speak, are the coffees and the teas and the chocolates. And obviously clothing. I don't really buy new clothing except for underwear. But fortunately, there are some ethical underwear makers these days, which is really great. And more companies for people that are buying new clothes that are looking at their supply chain and how their workers are treated. We obviously, work with and support organizations that are fighting for a more transparent fashion industry. Is there a certain area that, from your perspective, what do you think is that next category that, that fair trade organizations are kind of trying to get certifications for?
That's actually a great question because the fair trade movement is constantly growing and evolving. And actually one of the newest fair trade certified products is Shabani yogurt. The Greek yogurt. Yeah. It's yogurt, something I eat every morning. And it's like, that's one of the newest like fair trade dairy. So that was neat. They're actually really growing the agriculture program in I think the US and abroad. So if our listeners are listening to this between the month of May and July, we want to encourage you to go shop fair trade tomatoes from Ralph's because they're doing a pilot program right now to see how well received this is, like fair trade tomatoes. And they're only doing this pilot program in LA and Denver.
Okay.
And just to see how well people respond. And, so it's like a testing. And so we encourage you to shop fair trade tomatoes, but that's just examples of how we're constantly coming up with new fair trade products. And it's so exciting. I know that there's also a lot of trafficking and exploitation happening in the seafood industry. And it's like, that is something that I've seen fair trade slowly starting to respond, but would love to see more of that happening. But like you said, it's so hard because it's a growing movement. And I was surprised to learn that fair trade coffee is still only 6% of the coffee industry.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really surprised to learn that this week. So it's like there's still so much growth that needs to happen. But I think that more growth will happen more rapidly when we respond and we say, yes, we want to see fair trade products. We want to buy those fair trade tomatoes. So
that's so great to see that that it's moving into more categories. I had no idea about the yogurt. That's really exciting for yogurt lovers. And that's just astounding to me, though. 6% of coffee is fair trade. It breaks my heart because, coffee and tea, most people drink one or the other at least every day, right? I don't know the stats. I'm just assuming based on just my knowledge of people in the world. And I've traveled abroad and I feel like, sure, some people are team coffee, some are tea drinkers, some are both, but I rarely encounter someone that doesn't drink at least one or the other. Yeah. And, that's just so sad to think about that small percentage.
I know. And that's our goal, is to make fair trade a norm. Like fair trade should not just be a niche. It should be a norm. And what kind of encourages our movement and what we look towards is London, because the fair trade movement grew out of movement in Europe. Okay. And so Europe's a lot more advanced than we are in terms of the fair trade movement. So we often look to them. And it's funny, fair trade coffee and tea is such a norm there that it's everywhere. My friend was at the parade for the royal wedding, and there was like a little tent just selling coffee for people who are just sitting, waiting for them to pass, right? And it says fair trade coffee, fair trade tea, as if it's no big deal. Like that's just the norm there. Or I heard that like Kit Kat bars, it's fair trade over there, but not fair trade over here, because again, over there it's a norm, like people expect it. So that's the goal, right? For us to just like expect like this is fair trade should be the norm with everything we buy.
That's infuriating to me. And I have to say, as a mother of 2 small children, I do buy fair trade candies, but they have had Kit Kats, for example, and it happens to be one of my kids' favorite candy bars.
Was my favorite growing
And it's so hard for me because I really don't want to buy it for him. Yeah. Aside from the fact that, they shouldn't eat too much sugar and et cetera. Yeah. But I mean, but just the idea that it's not fair trade certified. But every once in a while I do give in and buy them a Kit Kat. I mean, it's so hard though, because it really doesn't, I don't feel good about it on a variety of levels. So to hear that they're making the effort, they are able to do it in certain countries. Exactly. I think it just points to the need for more legislation and organization around that. So let's dive into just kind of like the fair trade organization world a little bit. Yeah. So there are kind of like the broader organizations that cover the United States, and then there are local chapters. Are you a chapter? How does it all work? Yeah. Because I know there are a lot of different fair trade groups.
Yes, it can get confusing. That's why I'm glad we're kind of diving deeper into this today. The logos I showed you are the certifiers. So they're the ones going out there certifying the products and the companies. But, we still need advocates and movement on the grounds, right? To raise awareness for fair trade, to educate. And so that's where fair trade campaigns comes in. Fair trade campaigns is kind of like the national umbrella, encouraging city, whether you're a city, whether you're a congregation, whether you're like a school or university, you can become a fair trade organization. And that's all housed under fair trade campaigns. And there's fair trade campaigns, fair trade cities all throughout the US. So Fair Trade LA, we are a fair trade city. And even in LA, like UCLA is a fair trade university, LMU is a fair trade university. So then there's fair trade congregations. So our work basically is raising awareness for fair trade at the local level. But there's also this thing called LA campaigns, where for many years we had to, I'll go back. It can get confusing talking about this. So at the city level, we can actually advocate to become a fair trade city. And what that means is, depending on your population, for LA, we had to identify over 100 businesses that sell to fair trade items. We had to identify over 100 organizations that serve fair trade. So for example, a dentist's office, a doctor's office, a church that would serve fair trade to their people. You had to make sure you're doing educational events. But one of the last things is you have to pass a fair trade resolution with your city council. So LA, we met with all of our city council members. We were scheduled to pass a fair trade resolution March of 2020. And that's when everything shut down. So that had to be postponed. But it was in August 2020, virtually, the city council members met and unanimously voted to pass the fair trade resolution. So as of 2020, LA is officially the largest fair trade city in North America and the fourth largest in the world. So that's a little bit about our work in LA.
That's so exciting. And so does that essentially mean that the city is committed to also embracing fair trade practices outside of the work that that your organization is doing with companies in the city?
Exactly. So that's exactly what it means, is that they are committed to it. They also recognize that every second Saturday of May, they recognize it as World Fair Trade Day. So essentially that's kind of like our first step into bigger steps. It's our first step into procurement. It's our first step into we're even now talking about the Olympics, just like other areas where we can now push fair trade.
That's so great. Would you say that the difference in Europe is has the European Union, for example, taken steps on behalf of all of its member states to kind of create like a fair trade Europe, or is it not quite as overlapping as that? How did Europe manage to become so focused on fair trade in comparison to here?
There's actually, it's so funny because we're talking here about fair trade cities. In Europe, there's actual fair trade countries. Mm-hmm. Isn't that just amazing? Fair trade, or Wales and Scotland, they're fair trade countries. I think they were like one and two, like first and second countries to commit to fair trade. And I think that the movement was birthed out of there. I've heard histories. There's different stories of their history. They've worked with refugees. I've even heard them say they worked with Chinese refugees back in the day. So just all these, I think because they have to deal with so many different countries and people coming in and out from different countries, maybe it's a lot more prevalent topic. It's a lot more of a situation they have to deal with up front. And again, I think there's just more consumer awareness and more consumer demand. It's almost like here we're so distant from the makers, we're so distant from the producers that we just don't even think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then fortunately, organizations like Fairtrade LA and other fair trade organizations around the country are working to try to change that. And hopefully over time, we can become more and more fair trade. Um, on that note, how can people in LA get involved? But obviously, people might be listening from different places around the country, also around the world. So how can people participate in the fair trade movement?
Yeah, so definitely if you're interested in getting more involved, look for your local campaigns. There are local campaigns in your city. So before LA, Chicago was the largest fair trade city. I know New York has a movement. But if you're in LA specifically, feel free to go to our website, fairtradela.org. We have events coming up. But also, we recently launched a Fair Talks podcast. And it's the same idea of bringing fair trade education to people wherever they're listening to, right? So yeah, you can become members. If you're a fair trade business, you could become a business member at Fair Trade LA and get involved with our pop-up events. There's also a business directory on our website with the small businesses that we're connected with. If you're looking for ways to shop fair trade. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to get further involved in the movement.
All right. So switching gears a little bit, obviously we're very focused on sustainable and ethical fashion and, helping to promote fair trade in fashion, secondhand fashion, sustainably made fashion. We're all a bunch of fashion lovers over here. I love a good fashion love story. So do you have a favorite item in your closet and what is it? And what do you love about it?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was not even planning this out, but I'm totally wearing like fair trade clothing right now. So my shirt is from Pact. We're Pact, so fair trade, organic cotton, fair trade factories, everything. And then this jumper thing is from Known Supply, also a fair trade company. But besides that, I recently realized a lot of my favorite pieces are actually thrifted from Crossroads. Crossroads, it's a secondhand store based in LA. And yeah, I don't know whether it's because I think it is because of the pieces, but also the story, right? It's like you just feel good about wearing it. So it's so powerful talking about secondhand.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great way to respect the things that we've already made, regardless of how they were made, right? At that point, by the time it's secondhand, it's already out there. So we should just wear those items.
Yeah.
And then if we do buy something new, we should absolutely make sure that the people who made it were paid a living wage and worked in safe conditions and that sort of thing. I love Pact. I buy my panties there.
Yes, you could feel the quality difference once you wear that organic cotton. It's so nice.
It's so nice.
Yeah.
Is there anything right now that's really inspiring you? Any art or activism or, kind of what's inspiring you at the moment?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. And I really do feel like the podcast project, the Fair Talks podcast, has been a real inspiration the past few months. Recently, we had a conversation with the Garment Worker Center and having a garment worker speak on there as well. And it's just such an inspiration to hear their story of overcoming just sweatshops in LA, but also their heart, because a lot of these garment workers, they're from other countries. So there was someone who has family in Indonesia and Mexico. And then so their heart for those people, the people back home, right? And I'm able to share with them saying, fair trade is fighting for them. Fair trade works so much in those, developing countries. Like, that's why we're here. And just being able to hear people's heart, behind this and to say that we're doing something about it has been a real inspiration for me and to motivate me in my work.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, when I see people that are in those situations and they're sharing their stories, I can't help but feel for them and what they're going through, and absolutely want to support them and help make sure that that things are just more fair and ethical for workers. I think that, all humans deserve dignity, and I feel very strongly about that.
And how powerful it is that we get to make a difference. We get to literally bring positivity and like a solution to this movement. So powerful.
Yeah. Speaking of positivity, what's keeping you optimistic right now in these dark times?
I know. I feel like we're just hit with so many heavy things. I really feel like in order for us to be hopeful and optimistic about the future, we have to look back. I think oftentimes we can get so depressed by looking at our present or our future. But when we look back at how far we've come, we have to be hopeful. We just within my short time being in fair trade, for example, we see you can find fair trade products almost in all the grocery stores or even like CVS. Like I'm constantly surprised. Like I could find fair trade chocolate at CVS, which is something that I would have never thought of, right, when I first started in the movement. So I just feel optimistic by seeing how far we've come. And even just talking with people at our pop-up markets and just seeing their heart and how much they care. Like, I just know that our job is to let them know, with these podcasts, like to let them know, but there are people who care and want to make a difference. And I constantly am motivated and inspired by those people. So yeah, I just think we've come so far. Yes, we have a long way to go, but we're getting there.
I love that. I think that that's such a great perspective to just take a moment and pause and look at the progress that we have made.
Yeah.
I think that that's a kind of a very mindful approach to that.
Yeah.
And so how can people find you and Fairtrade LA and your podcast?
Yeah. So you can follow us on social media at Fairtrade LA. And our podcast is on everywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's called Fair Talks. So definitely subscribe to this one as well.
Thank you. Well, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for educating us and giving us more in-depth information about fair trade and the movement. And we look forward to seeing how fair trade grows in the coming months and years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And I look forward to doing a swap together soon.
Yeah. Have a great day, Elisha.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Swap Society podcast. Swap Society is an online clothing swap for women and kids that makes it easy and affordable to mix up your wardrobe sustainably. We're a growing community of women across the USA who are creating positive change by swapping our clothes and slowing down our fashion consumption. We would love to swap with you. If you're interested in joining, you can sign up at our website. Learn more at www.swapsociety.co. That's swapsociety.co. You can find the show notes for each episode on our website. Please get in touch with us on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for the video version of this podcast at Swap Society. Music is by Joel Korlitz and yours truly. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please help us spread the word by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, sharing on social media, or simply telling a friend. We really appreciate your support. Have a wonderful day, and remember to swap before you shop.